still kind of talking about government things and talking about controlling speech, and this is about seemingly giving a voice to a group that seemingly doesn't have a voice. The voice referendum in Australia. And so Australia are about to do their first referendum in something like 20, 40, 30 years or something like that, that they're doing their first referendum since then. Actually, I saw that written. I thought there was a referendum on gay marriage, or was that not a referendum? Because I remember voting in that. That wasn't a referendum.
No, it wasn't a referendum, no.
Oh. What's the difference between that and a referendum then?
Well, what happened before the gay marriage legislation was presented and passed through the Parliament is that our Bureau of Statistics, believe it or not, surveyed people, and you're able to respond to a survey, and then that was used to inform the government's position, and that subsequently led to legislation which was passed through both houses of the Parliament. A referendum is a much more formal mechanism which is administered through the Electoral Commission, and so there are lots and lots of checks and balances. So the survey, if you like, that was undertaken prior to the same-sex legislation, that's exactly what it was. It was just a survey conducted by the Australian Bureau of Statistics. Yeah.
Okay. I thought we were doing an official vote. Okay. All right.
Well, a lot of people probably did, because it was all very confusing. It was, in part, that was, I think, confusion on purpose. Look, yeah, that's probably something we could talk about at length another day. But and another reason, of course, why people are rapidly losing confidence in their governance.
Yeah.
But
okay.
That's probably something for another day.
No, that's good. That's good. Thank you for that clarity. So let's talk about this referendum, because on the face of it, it seems like, oh yeah, sure. So the natives of Australia, the Aboriginal people, they refer to them as the first people of Australia. Apparently, they are one of the oldest civilizations on the planet. Apparently, that's what they seem to say. I don't know where that comes from, but they're saying that they want to be able to give those people a voice. They want to create a position within Parliament that gives them a voice to be able to contribute, because they make up a portion of Australian. I think it was actually, I was surprised how small of a percentage. I think it was like only something like 3% or something that I read somewhere. That I'm surprised that our native, our native people, there's only 3% of them. That was surprising. But this referendum is to allow them a voice in Parliament, which, I don't know, to me on the surface, I'm like, that sounds fair. Why not? But for me, it throws up some red flags. What's your take on what this what is this referendum actually about, and what are the things that we as leaders need to look out for in these sorts of things?
Well, it's a bit hard to know exactly what it's all about. It isn't about a voice in Parliament. It's about a voice to Parliament. As many commentators have already pointed out, there is already a voice in Parliament. We have 11 Indigenous members of our Parliament in our lower house and in our upper house, which in Australia is called the Senate. So there is already a voice in Parliament. This is about establishing mechanisms, institutions, which would, as they say, provide a voice to Parliament, but not just to Parliament, to the executive as well. And that includes the executive among the ministers. In other words, it's basically the cabinet, which also makes some decisions, but it's also a voice to the public service and also to the Governor-General, who is formally the head of state, representing the King Charles III. So it's quite complex. Now, I'm going to forget your question, I'm sure, but there are already mechanisms available for a voice to Parliament and to many, many other levels of government in Australia at state level and at local level. So it's not as if there is no opportunity, as it were, for voice. There are those who would argue that those opportunities haven't been effective, so we don't have effective institutions, processes and law to allow that to happen. And so one of the underlying reasons for this proposed referendum, which would change our constitution, is to embed the so-called voice in our constitution. Now, once it's in the constitution, it's unlikely that it will ever change. Constitutional change is very rare in Australia. Most of the referenda that have been put to the people have actually been lost. The threshold is quite high. A referendum on a constitutional change can only pass if a majority of people in a majority of states vote in favour of the change. So the threshold for change is high, and that's a wise thing.
And when you say majority, are we talking 51% or it's higher?
Yes, no,
like
that's
it's actually
right. It doesn't have to be higher than that. It's got to be a majority of votes in the majority of the states.
Yep.
So it's quite a high threshold, and it's there to protect the constitution from change, as it were, like for political and so on. So in other words, you see, because it's the founding document, now the constitution, of course, is open to, or should I say, government legislation is open to challenge on constitutional grounds. So one of the concerns among many is that embedding a voice in the constitution will lead to many cases in the High Court. Because what a lot of people don't understand is that the constitution itself and government legislation, that's only part of the law. The rest of the law is interpretation, and that comes when court cases are brought. And that's why the High Court would become involved in any arguments as to whether or not the right that was enshrined in the Constitution was actually appropriately dealt with by some process of discussion and so on. Now, the arguments, so that's basically the argument for it. In other words, what we've got at the moment isn't working, and we need something embedded in the Constitution to make it all work better. And I hope I'm representing that case adequately. It's a little bit hard to get some cogent arguments on that side because, quite frankly, that side of the debate has been pretty much taken over by people that I would regard as radicals. And there's a lot of debate as to whether or not Aboriginal people in general are being adequately canvassed on their opinion of the whole process. My own view, I will be voting no in the referendum, and I've seen nothing to persuade me otherwise. My own perspective, I have two objections. One is on principle, and the other one is based more on practical grounds. I don't believe that any particular race ought to be accorded any right in the Constitution that is not available to others. That's an in principle opposition to this change. I don't think, I mean, Australia is a multicultural country. We are a country of migrants, regardless of what your view of our history is. And we're made up of many, many different ethnicities, and to give one ethnic group preeminence in the Constitution in principle. Second, from a practical perspective, the view that I've come to form after reading the views of many in favour and against, including lawyers, and I would have to say senior lawyers, experienced lawyers are not unanimous in their view. So, and look, honestly, if senior lawyers can't agree, now of course things are going to wind up in the High Court. And so we're going to have the High Court deciding exactly how this provision ought to be executed. So I think it raises pretty serious practical issues in terms of how much the mechanism, well, let me put it this way to use a metaphor, I believe it's going to throw a whole lot of rocks into the mechanism of government, which will slow things down. Look, our Attorney General admitted in a media conference just in the last 24 hours that really although the Prime Minister and others have said, look, it only applies in terms of those things that affect our Aboriginal brothers and sisters. Well, who's to say what legislation affects them only? I mean, I can't think of it very much at all. There would be some specific legislation, but by and large, whatever the government is discussing is going to affect all citizens. And if it doesn't, why are they discussing it? I mean, they're the federal government, for goodness sake. So I think it's a very unwise move to make, very unwise indeed. But there have also been, we're talking here about controlling our speech. To my absolute horror, the original proposal was the government wants to make all sorts of changes to the whole legal processes concerning the referendum. They want to remove things like providing to every elector a for and against case in written form delivered into our post boxes and so on. And initially, the organisations that were presenting the no case were granted tax deductible status, and those on the yes side were told, no, you're not going to get tax deductible status. I mean, I think that is absolutely reprehensible because it's really an infringement upon the right of people to have a view. Unfortunately, those who are voicing publicly their opposition to the proposal are being name-called. They're being called racist and bigots and so on. It's that sort of hard left trotting out the name-calling and so on, which I just think it's an absolute disgrace. I really do, because this is important. And look, what's at stake? We've got serious issues to tackle amongst our Aboriginal people. They're overrepresented in the jails, and they're overrepresented in the jails because domestic violence is a far more serious problem there than it is in the rest of the population. And the data show that unequivocally. And it just, I think it's very sad that we've got now this war going on when children are being molested, wives are being bashed, and we've got politicians grandstanding. We spend something like $30 billion a year addressing these issues, and things haven't changed. Wasting air by talking about these kinds of issues, it's just doing a disservice. We have the city of Alice Springs, which is, that city is almost literally being burnt to the ground. There is so much unrest there. Governments don't seem to be able to deal with it. I could go on and on and on. It breaks my heart that women, children, men as well, they're dying, they're being bashed. There's a significant problem with alcohol. And look, do you know what? I think ultimately this is about identity. And we can deal with this outside, and we ought to deal with it outside of the Constitution. This is a divisive thing in my view, and certainly I think what I've seen up until this point certainly supports that perspective.
So I think that, like, one thing that you mentioned there about being attacked for being racist, and like we said before, the left tend to just attack, not actually have a serious conversation about things. They just attack. Like they just bully. They manhandle. Obviously, using a gender biased statement there, but like they do tend to do that with this sort of thing, and that's kind of, when I saw it, I thought, oh yeah, so what about giving them a voice? And then all the red flags came up. It's like, the challenge is, we never know what this opens the door to, right? Like, it's not that, like, we mentioned about the gay marriage thing. It's not that we're against them getting, like, let them get, if they want to have a matrimony and whatever, a civil union or whatever like that, that's fine. But it's the other things that it then leads to. It opens the door to them being able to adopt, and the issues then of raising a child in, without a mother or without a father, and the ongoing mental health issues that have been proven through research of those sorts of things that happen now. I know there's plenty of arguments about that, but that's where my mind automatically went to, is like, oh yeah, it's okay, but what? And as you mentioned, like, it just opens up the door for all of these other things. It's not that we have an issue with them having a voice. There's nothing wrong with them having a voice. We should all have a voice, but it's the priority of the voice, and we're seeing this in America. Is now it's sort of like, now if you're a minority, you're actually the majority now. Like you're it's now the majority that are being marginalized now, pretty much. And you mentioned about the racism thing, and being claimed as racist, because that's my fear about it. Is, okay, so it seems quite obvious that if you vote no against this, you're now against Aboriginals. You're now against, like, you don't care about them or anything like that, like, because we all know they make that leap. So how do we become informed about something like this? Because we don't know what it leads to and things like that. And like the gay marriage thing, it was kind of like all pushed of, if you vote no, you're just a bigot. And that was their marketing campaign, pretty much. And so I think most people, just answered yes, because they're like, well, I don't care, like whatever, let them do whatever. And they didn't realize all the stuff that would come from it. But how do we actually become informed so that we can know what we're standing for, to say no to this thing from wisdom, not just because Dr. Rod said so? I want people to know why they're voting no for this. Where can they go for information? What questions should they be asking, etc.?
Well, look, as I said a little earlier, I think that the two dimensions here are, if you like, the in principle, or if you like, the moral or ethical dimension, and then you've got the pragmatic or practical dimension. I think know where you stand on really important issues. So you need, I think, to take a position on whether or not a constitution, or even government legislation for that matter, should offer to any particular group of people, be it racially based or based on anything else, to give them particular privileges or access to government that others don't have. In other words, you've got to take an in-principle position on equality of human beings.
Yeah.
Now, I think from a Christian perspective, that gets back to the idea every human being is created by and loved by God.
Yeah, that's good.
And so for me, the notion that we should have any mechanism which automatically gives some human beings privileges that others don't have, it's wrong in principle, because my understanding of God's own heart is that every human being has value.
That's good.
So that's for me, that's fundamental. I don't know that people think enough about those sorts of things today, and I don't know that we're taught enough about those things from the pulpit.
Yeah.
From the perspective of the pragmatic, I just don't think there's any way around some pretty hard work and read as much as you can about what people with different persuasions are saying. I spend probably too much. I mean, my own training as an economist, my deep interest in the flourishing of humankind leads me to spend a lot of time reading about issues like this. And so I've spent many hours, as I said, maybe longer than I should have, reading perspectives from people holding different points of view.
Yeah.
The conclusion that I've come to from the position of the pragmatic side of things is that given the wording that we now have, which allows the voice to make so-called representations, not just to the parliament, but also to the executive, that will open up many cases before the High Court where people fight government decisions on constitutional grounds, in particular here, on whether or not the representation was appropriate, and that will slow down the mechanism of government. It's slow and unwieldy enough as it is. So
yeah, I think that something you said before. I think equipping ourselves with information. You know, we mentioned last week about Stephen Crowder and what he does, and I love the fact that he approaches everything and he just backs it up with research, and he can fight something because he knows the facts about it. And I liked what you said before, because I think that going back to, I kind of feel like I have a sense that the biggest argument will be, if you vote no, you're a racist because you don't want Aboriginals to have a voice. Well, know the facts. Like Dr. Rod said, do you say there's 11? There's currently 11 members,
Indigenous Australian Aboriginal people in the parliament, correct?
So they've already got, and that's actually, like, if you look at the number of people, there's 30 in one and 50 in the other. No, there's more than that, isn't there? There's like 100. I can't remember. I can't remember how many are now. I'm trying to think back
senators. There are 12 senators from each state, plus a couple from the territories, and
so there you go.
You got around about 150 electorates. I'd have to go and check that, and I'm embarrassed that I don't know, because I should.
I'm thinking back to my days of when we visited the Parliament House, and you know. And,
well, they wouldn't have all been there to count anyway. But I mean, the point is that and I don't really think this argument carries very much weight. But what some people are saying is that Aboriginal people, or if you like, want to call them First Nations people, they're overrepresented in the Parliament.
I don't think. I don't think.
But
that's
my
a fair
point is
statement,
this:
but
there is a voice in the Parliament already, and it's there because worthy candidates have been elected.
Yeah, and actually,
the decision of the voters is that they are worthy. Otherwise, they wouldn't have got there.
Yeah, see, we mentioned about. I kind of want to equip that. Like, there are Aboriginal representatives in there. There are Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people that are members of Parliament. That's great, but also, every single elected member of Parliament have Aboriginals in their local communities, that those people are able to speak to their member of Parliament, and their member of Parliament should be standing up for their community, no matter what color they are, no matter what heritage they are. And so I think let's just be very careful. This is something where apparently we're controlling speech, of giving someone freedom to speak, or giving someone more of a voice that don't have a voice. Let's be educated as leaders, especially this is probably more of a directive to Australian Christian leaders. make sure you're informed, make sure you know what this vote is about. It's not about race. This is about understanding that there should be equality, not necessarily favoring one over the other, as Dr. Rod says. And there is already a representation. Members already represent. So don't get caught up in the rhetoric that if you vote no, it is a racist vote. Get out, get informed, but just be very, very careful, because I think there seems to be, for me, a lot of red flags. And as Dr. Rod shared, it's he's voting no on this because he just on principle and practically. And Dr. Rod's one of the wisest people I know, actually, probably the wisest person I know. So is there anything else you feel like you want to be able to share to be able to equip some of our Australian leaders?
No, look, I just think I'd reiterate those 2 points. You've got to make up your mind, where do you stand in principle, and then you've got to look at the practical implications. The only thing I would add is that some denominations and some large Christian charities have publicly stated their support for the voice, and some have done it quite a while ago, before much became sort of publicly available. So just be aware that there are some denominations and some peak charities in our nation that have made the Christian, a Christian decision to support it. So expect that there will be a variety of opinions, even within a local congregation. But I do think this is something that pastors should be addressing, and they shouldn't be afraid to state what their personal position is, and they shouldn't be vilified for that personal position. But they should also make room for their own people to have a different view, and I would certainly do that. I wouldn't want anyone in my own congregation to feel less of a person because they had a different view to that which I had. And but I like to be able, I mean, I'm not really trying to convince anybody one way or the other at this point, but and look, some people would say, pastors, keep your opinion to yourself. This is a very important decision that we're making. I feel comfortable in sharing my opinion and explaining why I have that opinion. But it would be quite hypocritical of me to close my ears to arguments that are not the same as mine. And I think as pastors, we need to play the peacemaker role as well. We need to listen to what people are saying.
Hey, that was an excerpt from our On the Cube Leadership podcast. If you enjoyed it, give it a thumbs up, put a comment below. And if you want to see more content like this, faith-based leadership development content, make sure you check out our channel, give it a subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you'll be notified when we release new content.